Yes, we are recording the session. I was going to give you a nudge on that. So, the usual operation is cameras and audio off until we get to a Q&A. And if we have the bandwidth, you're more than welcome at that stage to turn it on. Of course, if you don't want to be part of the recording, then you leave your camera and phone, camera and audio off. This is the third of our chapter seminar. We still haven't nailed down, I think, what the big title of this is, but essentially it's an excellent learning resource with the brilliant co-authors that we are the authors and multiple authors. I think we're up to 40 authors within this Myths of Sports performance book. And each month, similar to the Myths of Sports coaching book, we are blessed with their time to not just give us a little bit of a summary and snapshot of the chapter where it came from, the research, but in natural formation of how long it takes to put a book together, stuff has moved on, and different pieces of research and interest of the particular authors comes to the forefront. So it's also great to get that extension of what are you working on now, or what's changed, or what's evolved. But also, as you know, the common phrase, bringing stuff to life in the session, as Jane will do this evening with amazing examples. So, Dr. Jane Booth, an absolute advocate for leadership, authentic leadership. The chapter is incredible, really thought-provoking. She spent a really, really long time beyond and before her PhD diving into this topic, and works across, which she'll share in a second, a number of different organizations, projects, large and small, really diverse communities exploring this topic. And I am constantly stimulated by the variation and perspective that Jane brings on this topic. So I'm really excited for us to share this evening. In typical fashion, the chat box is there. Anything that comes up as we're going through, I know having a snapshot of Jane's presentation this evening, it won't be transmit. There'll be lots of chances to interact, get your cogs turning, even though it's late in the evening and the end of the month. So bring what you can in your thoughts to the chat box, a comment, a question, and there will be an kind of an exclusive Q&A at the end of the presentation. But yeah, we're just delighted to have you here, Jane. The book has been, the launch of it since September has seen it go far and wide globally. I've mentioned we have 40 authors. We have a real richness of what's happening in sport performance spaces and the wider kind of practitioner space, and this topic is at the forefront. So yeah, I'm curious to know already where people's thoughts are going and how they've arrived in the room, but it's not for me, it's for you, Jane. So segue to you, Jane. Before you dive into your presentation, I would love to know, and Amy and I would love to know just a little bit more, if you could share with the spaces that you're operating in, so people can kind of really get a feel for how much you're bringing to the session this evening. Yeah, and thanks for being here, and thanks everyone for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Well, thanks for that intro, Jen and Amy. And firstly, a big thanks for inviting me to write the chapter and contribute to the book. It's always good to kind of have a challenge and get your brain working and whirring and be able to think about things. So where do I operate? So I work for myself, and I have done since 2016. And I work across a variety of sectors, I guess. So most of my career has been in sport. I worked for the Professional Golfers Association for 10 years. And since I left there, have been involved in or contributed to various different sports. Now I predominantly work in maybe leadership, and particularly leadership for gender equity, so a number of women's programs. So for example, I facilitate and mentor on the WISH Women into Sport High Performance Pathway program, which is funded by Olympic Solidarity and is around really seeking to address the gender gap at coaching with coaches at the Olympics. I also work in women in the financial and fintech sector, again, women in leadership, but supporting and working on programs and really seeing the same things. So seeing the same challenges across different sectors that women face, and being able to sort of, I guess, have the privilege of seeing some of that and seeing that actually there's some real simple things. Often it's thrown, women just need more confidence, and often it's not that. So really unpicking that. And I also do some work around impact and evaluation. So really kind of looking to understand. I contributed or led the impact report for the Wish program, which is available online if anybody's curious. And yeah, so those are, and in my spare time, I play the bass guitar in a worship band, and do some youth stuff as well, which I love and keeps me energized. So yeah, there you go. Is that enough of an intro, Jen?
Yes, absolutely.
I can breathe now.
No, and I did put you on the spot, so I appreciate that. But all of that feeding into the different perspectives for this evening. So Amy and I are really grateful. And over to you, Jane, for the session.
Great, thank you. Well, I will just share my screen. And what's really lovely, I'm just going to stop again and stop the share and check because there is some sound. So I'm going to make sure I click the share sound button, which I did. And I have to say, my mum and dad, in theory, on this webinar, they've just messaged said they can't get the sound working. And I'm like, Mum, I'm going to be talking. I can't help you. But it's also nice to see some familiar names here who've been on programs that I've worked across, which has been really nice. So, look, this is, I suppose, a segue to start off to say, look, that is my fundamental belief that great people make amazing things happen. If you can scan the QR code if you want to find out a little bit more about what I do. But I guess that's my starting point for everything. And I think around leadership particularly, that really feels like it comes to life. That we all have the potential to do things. We all have the potential to lead, to be leaders. Often and sometimes some of us need a bit more of a nudge or a bit more of a helping hand to just open our eyes to the possibilities and the idea that actually we can do these things. So yeah, I'm just putting that out there as my kind of opening fundamental belief. And what the next half an hour, 40 minutes or so are going to be is really me, I guess, taking you on a bit of a journey, taking you on a bit of an exploration of what it means. I will share what it means to me, which has formed over a number of years throughout my PhD, and in practice in the work I do. And I guess what I present this evening and what's in the chapter is really about getting you to take a different perspective and encouraging you to really think about the idea of leadership, because it's a word we use daily. We hear that, we hear talk of leaders and leadership, and and Jen, I think you posted on LinkedIn this week that it is something that's in our daily vocabulary. But what does it actually mean for us and to us? And I think that is a real sort of aim for me tonight, is just to encourage you to think about that, and develop your own perspective, which may or may not be informed by some of the things I share. But maybe there's one thing that just sparks you to go off and be like, okay, that's interesting. Where can that take me? So I'm going to just start off by asking you that question. And we had a sneaky practice earlier to make sure that the link was working. But if you've got your smartphone handy, you can scan that QR code. And I'm just curious to say, what does leadership mean to you? What are the words that come to mind, or, a phrase that comes to mind when you hear that question? So the ways to access the Menti are, if you've got your smartphone, you can point your camera at it and scan it, and it should directly take you there. If you want to open a browser because you're on your laptop, if you go to menti.com, and it will ask you for a code, and I will add the code. I'll read the code out in a minute. It's at the top of the screen. But if you need the code, it is 29849762. And I'll just read that again. It's 29849762. And I'll just pause for a second and encourage people to maybe just share a couple of words or a few thoughts in that Menti. And equally, if people can't access the Menti for any reason, feel free to put it in the chat, and Jen and Amy, if anything comes up, you can perhaps just share it for us. It feels so far, there's a theme here. There's something about empowering others, supporting others, bringing people with you. Role model, setting a vision. Thank you for all these. And this also just gives me a sort of a basis from which to from which I can work and go for the next little while. And I have I have a plan for this evening. Where that plan goes will depend maybe on what comes up. If there's any questions that you share in the chat, where we actually navigate to will depend on some of the things that come up. And I think it's also worth saying, I don't intend to go through the theory and to like go word for word or in any sense of what's in the chapter, because that's there and you can read it. What I'd really like to do is bring it to life and also share a few things of where my thinking is now, and offer you a couple of challenges, I suppose, at the end to finish with, to really get you thinking about this question about leadership and how you can take some of this into your everyday life. I'm just going to scroll that up and see where we're at. Let me get rid of that. So yeah, it feels like the theme there in terms of what is in the room is that it's about supporting people. It's about bringing people along with you, maybe setting that sense of direction, and then really creating an environment where people can thrive and flourish. So if you just hold those things in mind as we go through the next few slides, then we can build up a picture. And almost in my head, I've got this idea of a jigsaw that we've kind of got maybe a few pieces in there, and throughout this evening's session, maybe by reading the chapter, maybe then by you putting what you already know in, you're gradually building up that picture for yourself of what leadership means. So I have another question as well, and put responses in the chat. When we think about our world today and we look at the news, we look at social media, we listen to the radio, who are the people that come to mind when we think about leaders? And you might want to cast your mind back over history. Maybe think about some of the people who have led and the general public maybe would perceive as leaders. So yeah, feel free to pop things in the chat. Jen and Amy, please feel free to jump in as well and share any names that come to mind.
Sorry, Jane, people that are currently leaders.
Or we can go back over history, think about, I don't know, over the last 100, go back as far as you want, I guess. Who are the people that, would say, yeah, they were a leader? Maybe think about COVID times as well. Who are the leaders?
Well,
And
I'm thinking about people that were put in charge of leadership jobs, but I don't know whether we'd call them leaders. Here we go. Winston
thanks,
Churchill, Gareth Southgate, Martin Luther King. That's from me. And then we've got sporting leaders, Alex Ferguson, Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, thank you. And it's interesting, actually, Gareth Southgate hadn't spoken for a long time, and then he's spoken this week. And there's a real sense of kind of his words carrying some real weight, which is really interesting. So look, thank you for that, for sharing some thoughts. And here's a few people that maybe came to my mind as I was thinking about leaders.
Mother Teresa as well, we've got in the chat.
Excellent, thank you. And generally speaking, we tend, and this is kind of a societal thing, we tend to think of leaders as these kind of people. It's people who are in positions of power, who are given responsibility and are tasked with leading. So whether it's a football team, whether it's the EU, UK sport, and you look in that list, and in your head, maybe it's like, well, are they good leaders? Who's a good leader? Who's not a good leader? What are they actually leading? And I've added in, I don't know if people know who the rugby player in the bottom right is, but Eleona Mayer, who has such a huge following in rugby and has made a massive impact by coming over to play for the Bristol Bears for only 3 months. And that sort of idea of people really leading the way in their field, but they are really visible people. And that led me to another question, and I'm not asking for interaction. I'm conscious I'm asking for a lot of interaction. But just in your mind, who do you follow? So who are the people on a daily basis? And I think this word follow now, when we have social media, really has a different meaning to maybe it used to, because maybe you followed people in the newspaper or you followed your football team. But now we can follow so many different people. And I'm just curious, you know, in your own mind, just think about who do you follow? And then the second question is, why do you follow them? What is it about those individuals that leads you to be curious about them, be interested in them, and keep looking for what they say in social media, or whether it's a book or other things? I'm going to share a video with you now, and I will just when we tested it, it came across quite loud, so I have shrunk the volume down. But just in case it blasts your ears, I'm just putting that warning out there now. And I'm just going to play, I'm not going to play all of it, but I'm just going to play a short clip of this video and just watch it and observe what happens. And yeah, I will, that's all the intro I'll give you, but just And I'm just going to pause it there. And if anybody wants to, you can look that up on YouTube. And it's basically, it's called like Random Man Dancing at Festival. But somebody has actually put a commentary over the top, which is looking at leadership and the importance of first followership. So I'm sharing this really as just an example of maybe of my perspective and leadership. And I'm pretty certain that the people videoing that probably were videoing it for a bit of a laugh, because they're like, whoa, this strange guy has just started dancing, and perhaps weren't anticipating what was going to happen next. But effectively, you had one person who just was dancing on their own, nobody around, didn't really care. And then somebody else joined them. And there was an interaction, and you know, the person who was dancing first acknowledged the other person and embraced them, welcomed them in, and together they started, you know, they did their own thing, but they were dancing together. And then gradually, one by one, and then a whole host of people joined them. And I just invite you to hold that in your mind as we now go through some other bits around leadership, in terms of actually the leaders set the tone, set the direction, going back to some of those comments on the mentee. But while they were just on their own, they were perhaps a little bit of a, maybe even a little bit of a crazy person. And the other person coming in suddenly kind of made it okay. So that first follower and the importance of somebody joining allowed everybody else to then go, oh, okay, right, this is, I'm going to be part of this. And if you watch the clip to the end, it ends up with loads and loads of different people. But just hold that in your mind as we think about leadership, because I'm pretty sure that guy wouldn't have called himself a leader. But in a lot of ways, and in a lot of kind of sense of the word, actually, he created a following, and he created something just by being him and doing what he did. I don't want to watch that again. So look, what is leadership? And this is in the chapter. And looking around the definitions and looking around the literature, what I found intriguing and exciting at the same time, and also a little frustrating. But the quote at the top, you know, actually identifies that there is no one single definition of the word leadership. And actually, the more people are exploring the idea of leadership, the more people are trying to understand it and explain it, the more complicated the answers are getting. And on one hand, as a researcher, it's a little frustrating because you're like, just tell me, you know, what is this? What is the idea, and how can I define this, and how can I grow and develop something? But actually, for me, on the other side of things, it was like it gave me freedom and opened up actually to play, to explore, and to think about, well, what really is leadership, and where can we go, and what can we actually do with this concept? Because for me, the more I experience other people, the more I work with people, the more I believe that we all have the potential to be leaders, even if we don't have the title that tells us we are. And that is the essence, I guess, of the chapter. And I think as we go through some of these things, it's about what are those steps and what are those things that are in place that enable us to say, or believe that I'm a leader, and believe that actually I can influence others, just as that random man dancing in, I think it was the Saskatchewan festival. So a little bit of the theory that again is in the chapter, depending on who you look at, depending on the theorists you want to follow, is leadership a top-down approach? So do we have that one person at the top that leads the organisation, sets the direction, sets the vision, and basically tells everybody else how to turn up and where to, you know, how to be? Is it some of those big names that were on that first slide? Other researchers in the field would argue that it's a bottom-up approach, that actually organisations can be led from the bottom. It can be led by all of the people having a vision, all of the people actually not necessarily with power, but actually that bottom-up approach influences the people at the top. What we also see is this kind of idea of like shared leadership effectively, where actually everybody has a responsibility, and it creates a mesh and a web of everybody taking a certain different bit of responsibility. And I guess with each of those approaches, there are challenges, because the top-down approach, if you've got a really effective leader who cares about people, who cares about bringing people along with them, that can be really effective. Often, and in many cases, and certainly, you know, I've experienced in the past, actually you have somebody at the top who is not an effective leader, or they believe they're an effective leader, but actually what they create is a fairly toxic environment because of how they're showing up. Challenges with bottom-up approach is if everybody has a different idea, how on earth do you actually get some consistency and move forward? And similarly with this, you know, this idea of distributed leadership and shared leadership, you can potentially end up with a really complicated web. So I came across and reference it in the book. The original book was Tempered Radicals. In more recent years, that's been reframed, and I think it's called How to Lead and Not Rock the Boat, because of the connotation the word radical came to have. And for any Star Wars fans, you will notice the symbol, the logo of the Rebel Alliance in the bottom right-hand corner, which felt sort of, I don't know whether they're under the radar, but it felt relevant. So that is what that is. But Deborah Meyerson described these under the radar rebels as people who don't necessarily have to be the chief executive or the person at the top. Actually, she characterized leaders as people with bold visions, but also those other characteristics: patience, persistence, resourcefulness. And if you read her book or any of her work, she tells stories about people who they didn't have or didn't perceive themselves to have any power, but actually they fundamentally believed in something. And in every opportunity or every situation they showed up in, that drove their actions. So she uses simple examples like somebody who'd been told to cut their hair or tidy their hair up to go to a job interview. And that person had chosen, actually, I'm going to show up as me in that situation. So there are really simple things that wouldn't necessarily be thought of as leadership, but actually if you believe in something, it's about showing up consistently and deliberately and intentionally as you in those environments. And that to me really kind of struck a chord, because I wasn't convinced that leadership was just something that we saw from the top. And this kind of gave me, I suppose, my baseline from which to explore. I also like this idea of Trojan mice. Everybody knows what a Trojan horse is, but Trojan mice, imagine like lots of little mice scurrying around, all believing in something that's similar, and you know, just running around. And as they're running around, leaving a positive legacy or creating a change, as a ripple of change as they go. I'm just going to stop that share for a minute because I'm just going to jump ahead a couple of slides. And as I do so, I just invite you to think about your kind of world and the people in your world. And I wonder, as you're thinking, who are the people around you that you're like, actually, yeah, they're a great leader. They are somebody who I see consistently showing up in a really positive way, consistently showing up as themselves. I know who they are. I know what I'm going to get. And because of that, they're able to lead me somewhere and help me and support me and guide me somewhere that they want to go. So I just invite you to hold that in mind. And I offer you this quote as well in terms of when we seek to define leadership and you read quotes and you read descriptions, it can quite often feel like a set of lists that you do. Leaders set visions, leaders communicate well, leaders bring people along with them. But for me, leadership is about how we are and how we show up each time we interact with different people. And I think when we look at, when I started looking around at different leadership programs, for me, the really effective ones really delve into the idea of knowing self. Do people understand who they are, what's important to them, and are they bringing that to life through their actions, which is what the tempered radical idea was. Leadership programs that focus on how to develop a strategy, how to develop a vision, how to effectively communicate have a role to play and are part of this process. But if they're done without the concept of do these individuals really know who they are, actually it's missing something. And it made me think a lot about the idea of coaching philosophies. So we talk about a coach having a coaching philosophy as being a kind of cornerstone, a foundation stone of effective coaching. And for me, that's something really similar in leadership, which is where I headed and found and actually, to a large extent, stumbled upon the idea of authentic leadership. And again, you can look that quote is in the chapter. But effective, authentic leadership is about being yourself. And there's increasing amounts of literature now that have looked at, like COVID times, have looked at like challenging times, and authentic leadership emerged and evolved from like what feels like a desire to combat some of the toxicity and some of the challenges that we were witnessing within leadership. So authentic leadership emerged almost as a as a counter and as a positive way of leading in the 21st century. And it is still fairly new, or relatively new in the grand scheme of leadership. But for me, it really embodied what I believed and what I was seeing in the people that I was kind of experiencing as leaders. And in the chapter, I invite you, I share my story of Mr. Wiley. And if you manage to get your volume working, then you will probably remember Mr. Wiley. And he was my third year PE teacher or form teacher, and I'm pretty sure that he's the reason that I play the guitar and I got into sport. And for anybody who's as old as me, he had some high-tech Silver Shadow trainers, which at that time were like the trainers to have. And thinking back through your life, if you think about those type of people in your life, who are they? What did they do? How did they help you along your way? And when I did my PhD research, I interviewed and identified a number of leaders, in inverted commas, within the UK sport coaching world. None of them had job titles that said, I am a CEO, I'm a senior leader. And yet all of them were creating and sustaining change at some level. And for me, that was the definition of what I wanted to look at from a leadership perspective. They were, amazing coach educators who were doing some amazing things and really shifting how coach education was being delivered and how coaches were being developed. Equally, they were in different sectors. So within sport, but maybe not the traditional sport coaching governing body routes. but they were really like creating an environment where people wanted to be part of. And I was curious about what that was. And each of them talked about people. They talked about step parents, they talked about teachers, they talked about random sports coaches that they happened to bump into that invested time in them. They talked about teachers. Some of them talked about first bosses. So they talked about people that had really shaped them along their journey. And I'm not going to do that, Menti, but I invite you just to think in your own mind about who those people are. And this was the theme, the descriptor that I came up with for those people. And it draws me back to the first, when I asked you to share the first Menti around what leadership meant to you. The word supportive was in there several times. And that really came out in the great people that these leaders identified. So they were all supported by people who were caring and compassionate and really inspired them to learn and grow. And the important thing was that because they had that person, they were then able to do it for others. And I think that is the key for me when I think about leadership and what enables people to be a leader. Actually, they had it role modeled for them, and they were developed in an environment that enabled them to think about being a leader. And then this is another kind of reflection from the research in terms of, I think from my experience in sport, often we would look to the people that were the first to, we would look to our boards, our CEOs, our chair people to really drive things forward, and sometimes feel powerless that we had no maybe no ability to affect change. And yet what I was seeing from the people that I spoke with is they didn't necessarily have that job title, and they were still really impacting change and what they believed in. And it made me think about, are you a leader? Who is a leader? And how do we define who and what actually enables us to lead and to influence others? And going back to that video, the guy dancing, he created a following, and arguably to be a leader you need to create a following. So what was it that he was doing? What was it that I was seeing that really drove people to follow? And the starting point is, with all of these quotes, the starting point arguably is you need to see yourself as a leader. So rather than sitting back and going, well, actually, I don't have that title. I'm just a coach. I'm just a development officer. I'm just a whatever it might be. And often feeling frustrated, or often feeling like, well, what's the point? I can't influence the, those above me. But maybe shifting that, and actually all of these quotes and these people here would argue that the first step in being a leader is seeing yourself as one, or somebody who has the potential to lead. And I think I would add in there that is about influencing others. And authentic leaders, again, bringing this back to authentic leadership, that starts with knowing self. So first step is actually, do I see myself as somebody who can influence others? Do I see myself as somebody who can bring people along with me? That's the first step. The second step is then to be like, okay, if I want to be an authentic leader and I want to lead in this way, do I really know what I stand for? And do I really know what's important to me? And am I really building that firm anchor that is referenced in one of these quotes, so that when I show up, there's something that gives me a consistency to how I behave and how I interact with others. I'm just going to flash this up here. I'm not going to go into this in great detail. If anybody wants 80,000 words of bedtime reading, you can scan the QR code and get my PhD thesis. But these were the themes that came out. And again, it reinforced the need to know self. I need to know myself before I can actually have the courage to lead. I need to have great people around me. I need to experience some nurturing environments. And if I have all those things, then I can be confident in leading. I'm going to whiz through a couple of slides because they were there, great people, and this is where I wanted to get to. So if you know yourself, if you believe that you are a leader, or have the potential to lead and to create other people to follow, that you really know who you stand for, then for me, it's about how we ripple outwards. So there's this idea of this kind of meeting of, if I know myself, I can make conscious choices about how I show up in different circumstances so that people start to experience me in a really consistent way. And the counter to that is sometimes people, you're always a bit on edge. You're like, I'm not sure how to present this because I'm not sure how it's going to be perceived. I'm not sure how it's going to be received. But also we know the people who are inauthentic because we're never quite sure how they're going to turn up. So there's this kind of meeting of, I know myself and I'm going to make conscious choices about how I choose to lead and show up. And marry that with how others experience me. And if the two things are consistent and they match, then actually that is about leading authentically. If there's a mismatch in those things, that people aren't experiencing you as you want to be experienced, then it's going back to that kind of starting point of, do I really know myself? And actually, in order to lead authentically, I have to really know myself because I make those conscious choices. And this for me is really important. You know, we may feel like we have no power. We may feel like we have no authority. And yet we still have the potential to influence other people. It's like this tiny stone creating those ripples. And I came across this low cards exchange principle is from forensic science, and basically it argues that every contact leaves a trace. And it's the basis on which forensic science is built, because if somebody walks into a crime scene, they will leave something, which could be as tiny as a hair, it could be a fingerprint. But in doing so, there's evidence there that they were there, and it helps to then work out what happened in that crime. And I like to think about leadership in that way. Every interaction I have with another human being has an impact. It leaves a trace. And as an authentic leader, I want that to be a positive impact. I want that to have a positive ripple of effect, ripple of impact. I also know that actually the potential for me to interact with somebody, it could have a negative impact on them. So actually, if I'm inconsistent or I'm frustrated or I'm not behaving in line with my values and my principles, I'm not going to achieve the impact that I want. So on one hand, it feels quite like it's quite weighty, because actually every interaction is a potential to lead. But also I think it gives me at least that, okay, I do have the power to influence. I can't control what happens, but by showing up authentically and being me, I can lead and encourage others. And also I like this quote because it echoes that. And as a leader or as a human, you know the people around you that you walk into the room and your heart sinks because you're just like, oh man, they're here again. But also you know the people that your face lights up and you're just like, yes, this person's going to inspire me, and I can't wait to spend half an hour in their time. So I think being conscious of how we behave and how we show up, if we're doing that in line with what we believe, then I would argue that we are those leaders. And I'm just going to close with a couple of things around where my thinking is now. That sometimes feels, that idea of every interaction I have with another human has a potential to impact on them, can feel quite weighty. And often as leaders, when we see people who are leading ineffectively or, leading in a power over way, they are using that power in a perhaps a negative way, and in a way that doesn't positively impact on the other person. And for any Spider-Man fans, with great power comes great power comes great responsibility. So there is a pressure for us and a responsibility for us. You can either have Uncle Ben from talking to Peter Parker in Spider-Man, or if you want the philosophical route, it can be traced back, I think, to Voltaire in the 17th century. But this idea that actually, if I understand the influence that I can have on somebody just by being me and being authentically me, then actually I do need to think about that and think about the influence I can have on people. So I guess I'm intrigued by this even more, and really thinking about how how we can balance that, like desire to lead and influence others, with this idea that that is that we do have responsibility to use our power in a positive way. And just skipping forward to the last couple of slides, I offer you I love Brené Brown, and that is, I guess I'm offering you that as a quote which really matches my belief around leadership. You know, it's any of us, any person who, to use the research I've talked about, who sees themselves as a leader or with the potential to lead, and actually has the courage to develop that potential. It's not about titles. It's not about having that big corner office. It's about understanding your influence, your potential to influence, and using that in a really caring, courageous, and sometimes Brené Brown would use the word vulnerable way. And I leave you with that question. So, given that whistle-stop tour through leadership and some of my thoughts and reflections, are you a leader or are you just a? And if anybody wants to connect, that you can scan that. I'll take you to my website. Find me on LinkedIn. I'd be really happy to chat further, and yeah, delve into leadership on a wider basis. And if there's any questions, I would love to, or even just reflections and comments on thoughts about where your head's at now with leadership, which isn't necessarily a question, because I doubt I have all the answers, if any. I may just have more questions.
Thanks very much. I mean, you've got me thinking and reflecting, and I've got a ton of questions. So there's nothing in the chat right now. So if you don't mind, I'll kick us off. I was thinking about, I have a conversation a lot with some of my colleagues who are a little bit like quieter, or I don't like the term introvert, extrovert, but and we've had and we've seen kind of the loudest voice in the room be awarded the title of leader, if you will. But I completely agree that we can all be leaders in different ways. So for those people that maybe don't quite see themselves as a leader, but maybe want to be, how might they develop them skills or become more aware of the skills that maybe they've already got?
Great question. So I think I would say don't. My first bit of advice, I'll start with advice, is don't try and be someone you're not, because that is inauthentic. So this idea of authenticity is almost really spending time thinking about, okay, well, what's my superpower? What is it that I really know about myself that actually is it's my thing? It's my unique part in the world, or the things that I really believe in. And I think for me, the starting point is always, what do I know about myself and how well do I know about myself? And then it's like thinking about, how do I want to bring that to life, and how do I want others to experience me? And the challenge the challenge always is, how do I do that authentically when it might feel really uncomfortable? So actually, I might not want to speak up because I'm afraid, or I might not want to speak up actually because I don't, maybe it's because I don't believe I'm going to be heard regardless of what I say. So I think in those environments, it is about having that, what's my foundation and my rock that I absolutely know about myself, and how do I bring that into those environments. And just to bring, so the impact report I did for the Women into Sport High Performance program, the WISH program, there were three outcomes. It was like a journey, I guess. That the first was, because of the program, or because of the learning that the individuals did, they felt more competent. And because they felt more competent, it gave them more confidence to act and to speak up, or to do something a little bit out of their comfort zone. And the more they believed in themselves and believed in that, and the more experience they gained, they then found courage to really, like, and the courage bit was I'm going to put myself for a job I never dreamed I'd do, or I'm going to speak up in that meeting. So that maybe kind of provides a bit of evidence along the side. But I think it starts with, what do I really know about myself? And I'm really comfortable in sharing in those environments.
Yeah. So engaging in those reflective exercises.
Yeah, and I think there's is it Aristotle quote that says all leadership starts with self, or know thyself. And I think if there was, if people take nothing else away from this, the more you know yourself, the more you have that really strong foundation, then the more, don't know, the more, yeah, the greater foundation you have.
Yeah, yeah. And I was thinking as you were talking, and maybe you answered the question as I was thinking about it, but does everyone need to be a leader, or is the point that you're trying to make is that we can all be a leader in our own little way?
I think the answer might be both of those things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's any pressure on us, all of us, to be leaders. I
Mm-hmm.
think the biggest thing that I want to challenge is the myth that I'm not a leader unless somebody else tells me I am.
Okay, got it.
And also, and an awareness of just by being in a room, I am I am influencing others, how I show up, how my body language, emotions are contagious. If I sit there in a meeting like this, I am influencing others, whether I am aware of it or not. So the
Mm-hmm.
more conscious I am of my potential to influence others, therefore potential to lead, the more conscious and deliberate and intentional I can be with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that it's that awareness.
Yeah. We've got a question in the chat from Andy. So I think there's two questions and we'll go for both. Is there such a thing as a reluctant leader? Others see them as a leader, but they don't see it that way. That's a cool question.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're probably. Actually, I'd probably say yes to that because I think whether we like it or not, I believe that we are all, and maybe this is the really fine balance between influence and lead, because we
Mm-hmm.
do influence people. But I do think there is, and I think that reluctant leader work idea probably works to a certain point because often it's like, yeah, come on, we'll follow you. And maybe when that's covert or it's implicit and nobody's really said it, but it just happens,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's when it works. Maybe the kind of when the reluctant leader becomes more labeled and overt, that people are like, hey, yeah, you need to do that. If that person isn't ready to see themselves as a leader and isn't ready to be like, yeah, I have that potential, then
Mm-hmm.
actually maybe that's the point at which, I'm thinking out loud a little bit here, maybe that's the point at which somebody goes, oh, this isn't for me. Whoa, I didn't sign up for this.
Mm-hmm.
Takes that step back.
Yeah. And you made me think there about like leadership. Is there such a thing? I think there is because I feel like I've experienced this like leadership fatigue. So it's like you've taken on this, or maybe we're trying to. I feel I'm going to ask a question for me, Nadja. So I wear so many kind of leadership hats in my role that sometimes it becomes quite exhausting. But I have this need to help people. So yeah, it's learning when to kind of step back a little bit as well.
Yeah, and I would kind of, for me, what that makes me think of is that lead, with great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility idea. Actually, when people do see us a leader, it does come with responsibilities.
Mm,
And I think I would say that comes back to knowing yourself and being able to make those choices about what's important to me, how am I going to, and lead and ending well, exiting well. That's,
yeah,
for me, that's part of being an effective leader as well. Because
yeah,
actually, I want to leave something positive behind. But
yeah.
who else? It's almost who else is going to take the lead if I'm not there, and how do I ensure that that moves forward?
But then I guess it's good leadership to then help develop someone else to take over
Yeah,
your role.
yeah.
And maybe that kind of links in a little bit with Andy's second question about can people be leaders for people with a used by date? So yet to be defined, i.e. they may not need you forever. In fact, maybe only to manage or navigate for a short while.
Yeah, and I think there's a friend of mine who I work with often says friends are there for a reason, a season, or something else, and I can't remember what the something else is, or a lifetime, reason, season, or lifetime. And actually, I think that kind of probably applies to every aspect of life. And certainly, if I think back to like the leaders that I spoke to, and they're great people, they weren't all, there were different people at different points in their life, and I think that depends on what you as an individual need.
Mm-hmm.
And I also know from like if I reflect back over my own career, there was maybe points where actually I needed to move on before I did. And that wasn't necessarily about anything going wrong. It was just like, actually, there was fatigue, there was, needed something fresh. And it makes me think about, I don't know, what's come to mind is football management and how quick sometimes that turnover is. But often how a new manager can have an impact. I've put this out there as an Everton fan. David Moyes coming back and last season kind of comes to mind.
Jen, I told you we're not allowed to
Hey, I've got to get it in there.
Like, I don't have the research to hand, but my colleagues went to a really big medical conference, football based, and they were talking about the rotation of managers and the impact on injury, and what they'd noticed kind of a correlation.
Oh no.
Oh, we lost Jen mid. I feel like it was.
Well,
Can you hear me now?
Jen... Oh yeah, you back, Jen? Go on.
Was gold, and so there, and that's what so short and sweet, medical conference, and the research that they were talking about was a correlation between high turnover of managers and injuries within professional football. I don't have it to hand, but I'll source it and share it. But you really just made me think there, Jane, as you were speaking about the kind of the I'll go first. And like, I don't know for the full range of people here this evening, but there's definitely people who are working in toxic environments. There are definitely people who are struggling to see beyond well, I can be me in a room to a certain extent. Or I've done this before, as you've already alluded to, it might not be psychologically safe, or etc., etc. But I do think there's something in the small increments, as you said, around body language and being yourself, and that people see, oh, look, there's somebody always watching something, and feeling that kind of courage from somebody else's words or movement. And if we do, Amy, have that fatigue, which I definitely experience myself, it's how on the days where I do have a cup that's a bit fuller, that I can be aware of that, as you said, Jane, the interactions with people and the footprint, because other times I just want to be a follower, and I just want to be in the company of others, and let things pass by, or need that space to think and lean in. So thanks so much for that. It's stimulated a lot of thought.
Yeah. And the question from Dan as well, if you're not in a leadership position and notice things, would it be done through your behaviours and how you show up? For me, absolutely. And I think that's the Deborah Meyerson Tempered Radicals work around, knowing yourself and what matters, and just being consistent and showing up. And making, and for me, it's about conscious, deliberate, and intentional in terms of how you're going to show up. And I think the other thing that comes to mind as well is a friend of mine has got a 17-year-old daughter who just sometimes looks at her and goes, "Mum, that is a you problem," and walks off. And I think, as well as for us, like working out where that point is, to be able to kind of be like, actually, I cannot change and directly shift how you are behaving towards me, but what I can control is how I behave towards you, and that is consistent, and there's something really positive in that. So yeah, I would absolutely. It's the small, tiny little things that you do every day that matter.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Jen. We'll finish there. Thank you so much for your time. I know you put a link to contacting you, and if anyone does want some bedtime reading, they've got a link to your thesis.
Yeah, I won't be offended if nobody does.
And I know we've probably got many leaders on the webinar tonight, so thinking about things that I've taken away: are you being your authentic self? Can you be your authentic self? What does that look like? And how can you show up in ways that are authentic to you? So hopefully that gives everyone a bit of food for thought. Just before everyone heads off, I will put the link in for the next month's webinar, which is going to be a webinar on attention. So focus of attention theories, practice and myths, with Mariana, Robin, Vicky and Harjiv. So the link is there. If you want to book on ahead of everyone else, you are welcome to. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Thanks, Jen. And thanks again, Jane. We look forward to seeing everyone next month.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Amy.
Bye, everyone.